So here we are looking at a couple of the pages from Stephen Smith's 1989 book, Call to Order. In fact, we're particularly looking at Chapter 2, which is called Revolution in the House. And this entire chapter is dedicated to the Legislative Reorganization Act of 1970, but in particular, it is dedicated to opening the congressional vote. And Smith has nothing good to say about it. I mean, this just dramatically changed the way everything worked in Congress, and as we speak about all the time, it created a revolution in the way decisions were made by members in Congress. And Smith's chapter is so rich, but we're going to focus on one particular aspect of what he talks about in this chapter, and I call this torpedo amendments. And so what happens is, as soon as you open up the voting, especially in the Committee of the Whole, COW, you get a very dangerous situation, okay? So traditionally, throughout history, floor votes have been mostly open. And floor votes are really the final passage of a bill. And so if you've got a bill with 1,000 pages or 500 pages or something like that, and a senator or congressman votes for or against it, well, they could get called out by constituents and they could get called out by lobbyists. But remember, these bills are 1,000 pages long. And so if a particular congressman, say from Arizona, is voting on a particular bill, say it's regulation of sunglasses, which affects his community dramatically, he may be inclined to vote against this bill because his constituency doesn't want any regulation on sunglasses. Now, this bill, the regulation against sunglasses, could probably have been written in 3 or 4 pages, maybe less. But what they do with all the rest of the pages is they start to add in little favors for people who might get called out on that particular vote. So if the guy from Arizona votes for this bill, well, there should be something in there that makes him look good. So his constituency would say, hey, you voted for regulation of sunglasses. But inside that bill, we were able to build a new bridge for your community. Okay, so there's something good in there for him. There's a little favor because this bill is really big and it's really complex. And this is indeed how congressmen have always structured bills, so you might protect individual congressmen who may or may not want to vote for something. Now, that's the floor vote. That's when you're voting on 1,000 pages at once. Inside of Committee of the Whole, most of the votes are on singular amendments. Okay, so one tiny thing, often just one line being added to the bill. And that one line might be something like, we will build a bridge for the folks in Arizona. Okay, so there's your one line, build bridge for the folks in Arizona. And this becomes a very tough line to insert because it only benefits one congressman. And so traditionally, an amendment like this in the Committee of the Whole, especially if it was being voted upon secretly, okay, this line would get rejected. Because 434 or 430 of the congressmen get no benefit from this line whatsoever. So now we see the different dynamics with how Committee of the Whole works and how voting on the floor might work. As soon as the Legislative Reorganization Act of 1970 passed, a crazy thing happened. We started to get the very first torpedo amendment. So what exactly is a torpedo amendment? Well, if I have an enemy in Congress and they have real troubles with certain constituency issues, say they have troubles in their districts with something to do with gambling, and inside that particular district, you have about half the constituency that's very favorable of gambling, perhaps it gives them more jobs, and the other half really hates the idea that you're going to have a bunch of people gambling in their district, maybe drinking, doing whatever. In general, when a congressman has a situation like this, he doesn't want to go public with any real clear statements on this issue, especially if this issue hasn't received any big national attention. He really doesn't want to talk about this issue at all. Well, if I'm the enemy of this particular congressman, I'm going to propose a one-line amendment that talks about gambling, even perhaps in his district. And so now he's forced, because of transparency, to put down a yes or no decision. This is the last thing this particular congressman wants to do, so he's very, very unhappy. All the other congressmen don't care, or maybe they hate this line and they vote it down, but that's not the point of the amendment at all. The amendment is being written only to screw this guy. And so what we saw from 1970 up through 1974 was this rocket ship rise of these particular amendments that are calling out congressmen. None of this is constructive legislation, and some of it probably even passed. So these torpedo amendments, some of them even made it into final legislation, even though the only reason that they were being proposed was to call out and make enemies and make other people look really bad in Congress. And as we'll see with a Barney Frank quote that we'll talk about in another video, it's very easy to end up passing some of these torpedo amendments, even though they don't help anybody at all.